spots. The value we don't really know entirely because some of the injury news late in the week is what sort of finalizes it, and we might even find additional stuff on Sunday morning with the COVID test or whatever. If he scores 22 points, it's a bad day, right? Like, his median projection probably isn't terribly higher than that. So you really do need him to be blowing out. I mean, it's not like a bad day, but right, like it won't separate him from the field given the price. So I think you do bank on him to have a blow up performance if you're paying up. And I do think you need to consider that in tournaments. He can't just say, hey, I'm sick of Derrick Henry. You got to consider it at the very least. Dalvin Cook, 9K, great pivot also if you want to get off that. But I think in general, he's unlikely to outperform Henry. Kamara and Jonathan Taylor, right? Awesome ones to go to as well, 7,400. Kamara had 10 targets last week. That's encouraging because he only had 5 in the first couple games with Taysom. Don't know if that trend's entirely going to stick, but they'll be relying on their main guys here against Kansas City in a must-win contest. Jonathan Taylor, I mean, the rookies are kind of blowing up here, right? It's 7,200 for him. That's a huge jump, higher than he's been at any point during the year. But with him getting good touches in the past few weeks, I think that is well in the fold. James Robinson, got to keep an eye on his knee injury, but I think that's just general management. Dave Montgomery's gone further up. Miles Sanders, Chris Carson, some other names to keep an eye on. I don't think we're getting a full Chris Carson workload right now. I think we then got to go a little bit further down in Akers, Swift, a couple more rookies. Dobbins, another one. What do you think about Dobbins as a pivot off Lamar? Because or even Gus Edwards, right? Got a couple touchdowns on Monday night, but I think there might be other creative ways to work off Lamar's potential popularity.
Yeah, I sense that people really like Dobbins. So he's not really a sleeper. He's not a surprise. He is a pivot, as you were saying, but there's a lot of possible options. I mean, I'm not a huge Gus Edwards guy, but he gets enough touches where he's just an annoyance. And so I don't know how good Dobbins is going to get. If I knew he was going to get 20 touches, then I would get pretty excited about it. The matchup is obviously great, and I have no doubt that the Ravens are going to score some points here. And I'm bullish on the running game in general. I've been actually disappointed with how relatively mediocre the Ravens have run the ball this year, when last year they were just amazing across the board. All their running backs were good. So I'm a little hesitant about buying fully into Dobbins, and 5,900 isn't cheap. I mean, you can get a lot of players in that price range, anywhere from 200 or 300 more or less, or maybe even paying up for like an Akers who's at 6,600. That's only $700. To me, I'm not high on Dobbins because of that. The prices, if he was down at 5,000 or 4,600, where he was a really affordable risk, I'd be higher on him. I think he's going to be a more popular play than you might think, and I'm just not feeling like he's an obvious, very safe, reliable play. I think there's some risk there, and I think Edwards might take away just enough snaps, and maybe Lamar takes some touchdowns or does more running, or I just think there's too much risk there for me.
Well, let's talk about the main guy that I think everyone's going to be thinking about in the 4K range, and that's Leonard Fournette. Ronald Jones going on the COVID list. Seems like he's not going to be available, also as the finger injury. So Fournette at 4,500. LaShawn McCoy is also the stone minimum at 4K, but it sounds like Fournette's going to be the lead guy with McCoy sort of just playing passing downs. Is he someone that you're going to be trying to work in? Because he's obviously your best bet to get a lead back who's sporting value.
I would have probably 5 or 6 weeks ago, because I thought that Fournette would eventually take that job and he would be the number one guy there. But he hasn't. I don't know why that is. I think whatever's going on in practice, Fournette is not the guy there. Every time that Jones has an opportunity, he's going to be the guy. So for some reason, the Bucs just don't seem to believe in Fournette. And so I'm kind of taking cues from them. And while 4,500 is very affordable, so if you want to squeeze him in and do other things, if for that reason you want to go with Fournette, I'm on board there. But purely from a production perspective, I'm not confident that he's going to have a big day. So he doesn't have to have a big day. So if your budget demands that you need to go 45K, he's a good option at that price compared to some of the other guys around there. I talked about Gus Edwards. I don't want to be starting Gus Edwards. So if I had to choose between Edwards and Fournette, I'm going with Fournette. Or Sony Michel or Chase Edmonds, all these players that are in that same range, Le'Veon Bell. So if you're going at that price range, then I'm on board with Fournette. I just don't feel good about him doing what needs to be done. I don't know why, but he's just not as good as I thought he could be this year. And so I'm going to take the cue from the Bucs and kind of fade him until he proves that he deserves my confidence.
Yeah, weird spot for him coming off being a healthy scratch, in week 13, but he did have 16 targets in the 4 games before that, so you get a little bit of involvement in the passing game, and certainly someone who you should be considering for cash at the very least. In between of the expensive guys and sort of looking at other options, I think Nyheim Hines is a good pivot off Jonathan Taylor. Even though he's probably not going to get a ton of run on the ground, you can always get him to have a handful of catches, and Colts say they're still going to go with a hot hand approach in terms of the backfield, so maybe not entirely decided. Duke Johnson, someone who gets a few touches, although I haven't been too excited about him. And, that's pretty much it. I mean, are there other running backs you'd like? I've kind of been noticing a trend where I don't want to go too much further down.
No, I like some of those. I like the players that I do like. I like because they're not 9,500 for Henry. I like Taylor at 7,200. I like Cam Akers at 66. I like Kenyon Drake at 5,500. The way he's scoring touchdowns in his usage, I think because expectations, we talked about it last week, expectations were so high for him in the preseason. I think he's an underappreciated player now. I don't love him. I don't think he's a great player, but I think he's just better than what people think. And at 5,500, to me, that's a pretty good value. So I like Kenyon Drake. He just keeps scoring touchdowns. So for whatever the excuse to where you want to downplay whether he's good or bad or not, he's got over 20 carries in 2 out of the last 3 games. He's got 78 yards or more in 2 of those last 3 games. And he's got touchdowns in at least 4 straight games. So for me, for 5,500, that's a pretty decent resume.
Yeah, definitely have to like the 5 touchdowns over his last 4 for Drake, and I'm also on board with that play. Final names I want to mention are the guys in the Niners backfield, given that Dallas is, a weak defense. Jeff Wilson at 5,100. Raheem Mostert right now is limited with his ankle injury at 5,800. Jeff Wilson, especially if Mostert were to be limited or out, would be someone to have on your radar. Let's go to wide receiver here. Tyreek Hill, 8,800. Metcalf, 86. Ridley, 82. Hopkins, 79. A.J. Brown, Allen Robinson, the next 2 after that. All 6 of those wide receivers are more expensive than they were last week. And what I've noticed here is DraftKings is making the pricing a little bit more tight as we get deeper in the season here. And it's really challenging to fit too much in. And so you make that point about the savings from Derrick Henry. It's sort of the same deal at wide receiver, where I think there are guys who have pretty good ceilings also, somewhere around 5, 6, 7K flat. And if you're trying to get in more than one of, these top guys, it's pretty challenging. So what do you think about, these wide receivers here? I know that getting 2, if you're going cheap in other spots, could be a contrarian strategy. But if you got to pick one, who's that guy, or what's sort of the approach to navigating the expensive wide receivers here in week 15?
It's a tough one because the quarterbacks that I kind of like because of price, I don't like them. Here, I don't usually like them for performance. I like them because of their price. That's Trubisky, even Tannehill. We talked about Rivers. Those are the guys that I don't love them as quarterbacks, but with their price, I think they're interesting. Brown, I like. His production has been even. He's expensive. He's not cheap, but at the same time, he's much more affordable than, say, a Tyreek Hill, and he's been really good. Everyone knows that A.J. Brown is good, so I'm not saying anything that's shocking, but I don't think people realize just how good he's actually been. So I really liked the Tannehill-Brown stack, but the price is just too high. So when I was trying to build a roster, there were certain plays I liked. I really liked Jonathan Taylor. I like Kenyon Drake. Even with a $3,000 tight end, I couldn't get Tannehill and Brown into the lineup, and then trying to find a bring back. It was I kind of like Marvin Jones, but it just got difficult. So because of some of the players that I really liked, the pricing was just enough where I just couldn't get Tannehill and Brown into my lineups. So I can't go anywhere near Hill. I'm not big on the Seahawks this week, even though I think they'll have an okay game. So these guys at the top of the list, I just couldn't afford them. So for me, I'm not loving those games. Tyreek Hill, he's a monster. So if you want to try to find a way to build a team around Mahomes and Hill and Kelsey, I mean, that's an insane kind of way to do it. But if you want to try to do that, I'm not going to push you against it because the performance I expect to be very good. But these top guys, price-wise, I just can't put together an all-around team without too many punt plays. So as I'm trying to get Brown into my lineup, that's about as expensive as I can go. So really, I'm even dropping below that. Even Cooper Kupp at 7,000 is probably outside my range, with the one exception of Allen Robinson. I'm intrigued by him because he's just so reliable, even though I don't like Mitch Trubisky. Because I dropped down from Tannehill and Brown, I dropped down to like a Trubisky and Robinson. So Robinson was the one guy that over 7,000 I felt okay going with. And I only did that because of Trubisky. If I didn't have Trubisky in there, for the stack, I probably wouldn't have gone Robinson either.
I just want to make a throwback, right? A.J. Brown got hurt in week 1. He returned in week 5. In the initial weeks that he came back, week 5 and 6, he was priced at $5,400 and $5,600. And the first one of those, I think, was an island game against the Bills that got rescheduled and stuff. So I was only playing him in Showdown. But, those were ridiculously low prices for him. I miss the days that we could play A.J. Brown in the 5Ks. And now we're sitting here at $7,600 trying to squeeze him in, on a tough slate. Pretty funny. How that stuff has gone. I do agree that Allen Robinson and Trubisky is your cheapest overall way to pair up one of these top guys. And I was playing around in terms of Chiefs builds. I don't think that you go with Mahomes, Tyreek, and Kelsey this week with those guys being so expensive. And we'll get to tight ends, but Kelsey's $8K on the nose. For them to all have ceiling games, it's not out of the question, but it's very, very difficult. And I think you're probably better grabbing one of them. And if you do want to pick a second player to stack for with the Chiefs, you're grabbing Watkins or Demarcus Robinson or McCole Hardman or something of that nature. But Tyreek, my favorite of the wide receivers, if you can make it work. I think Hopkins too. Hopkins and Kyler is the one that's gotten relatively cheaper over the past month or so, and certainly in consideration. Michael Thomas would be your stack with Taysom Hill. I'm not wild about Kupp and Woods, just knowing that the Rams are probably going to run away with this one, and those guys do better with volume. But they're in consideration because you could easily get 2 first-half touchdowns. Terry McLaurin could have a bounce-back game here. And then Brandon Ayuk, who I know you mentioned a couple minutes ago, is the one who I want to just be jamming in everywhere. And this isn't a great game environment, so maybe that's the only thing that's keeping me from just, drooling over Ayuk. But the work he's getting is tremendous right now. Recent games, 16, 9, 14, 10 targets. Deebo Samuel's going to be out. Shanahan's been basically saying that we want more from this kid. I mean, I think that he's going to be a beast for them going forward, and even at 6,300 is probably underpriced. So I think Ayuk, someone to have on your radar. Anyone else here, Ayuk or others, that you just say, hey, I need to find a way to get this guy in?
I hate to fully get on board with your take and maybe kiss your ass a little bit, but Ayuk, when I asked you in the first segment, how are you building your team around, where are you starting your build? I'm not so sure I'd go as far as saying I'm building around Ayuk, but it's real close for what you said. His workload is enormous, and at 6,300, that's not free, but that's very cheap considering the ridiculous amount of volume he's getting and the fact that he has a Dallas Cowboys team that just isn't very good. So I love Ayuk too. I'm drooling over here, and you're saying everything that I'm thinking as well. So one of the reasons why I couldn't get A.J. Brown and Tannehill into my stack is because I couldn't bring myself to remove Ayuk from my lineup. But in order to do that stack, I have to get Ayuk 6,300 and find a way to drop that down to 4,500 in order to be able to do it. And I can't do it. Having Ayuk is more important to me than having Brown and Tannehill as a stack. So I'm on board with you. I love Ayuk. I like Hilton as well. You talked about how you don't like Rivers, but I like T.Y. Hilton at 5,500. And so that's one of the problems, too, is it makes the stacking with the quarterback difficult because I like a lot of these 55 to 7,500, 65, 6,800 type of guys. So Hilton, Ayuk, those are guys that I really like, but it just makes it really difficult to stack. I hate the idea of putting Trubisky in a stack, but to get Hilton and Ayuk and Kenyon Drake at the flex, I need to go with the quarterback that I don't like. So I wanted to get Marvin Jones Jr. in there against Tennessee as some kind of maybe a pivot off of Henry or whatever. But at 5,700, he's not exactly expensive, but I couldn't get him in there because I love Ayuk at 6,300.
Yeah, no, Ayuk's definitely someone who will be jamming into cash lineups and great to get exposure to in tournaments. I think Jalen Hurts is your key. If you just say, screw it, I want to fit in the other stuff. I don't have a good way to correlate my lineup. He and Taysom at 6K flat are the quarterbacks that would do best to be running out uncorrelated. Godwin and Antonio Brown would be guys I'd consider pairing with Brady. Kiki Coutie's probably come up in price more than I would like. So Chad Hansen at 4,200 would be the Texans wide receiver I'd feel best about. Though, again, you got to see what's going on with Cooks. And Rieger and Goddard would probably be my top guys as far as Eagles guys. But like I said, don't really need to pair anything up with Hurts there. Cheaper wide receivers to make note of. I think that Michael Gallup, Lynn Bowden at 3,600, Cam Sims, Demarcus Robinson would all be guys that you could work in. Lynn Bowden actually, I think, is probably the most interesting He's 3,600, was at the minimum last week, 9 targets, had 7 catches, 82 yards on them. The Dolphins are, really losing guys quickly. It's unclear whether